The minimum wage is a principle that ensures a legal minimum remuneration that the employer is obliged to pay employees for the work they perform during a given period. The purpose of the minimum wage system is to protect workers from poverty and to guarantee them a minimum living wage. Almost all countries have a minimum wage. Of the 28 EU member states, only 6 countries do not have a minimum wage, such as Austria, Denmark, and Italy. Some countries set a universal minimum wage for their entire economic sector, such as France. Others make a distinction between different economic sectors and categories of workers. The minimum wage is not a sufficient indicator to measure the quality of life in a country. However, it remains a more or less reliable indicator of the cost of living. Here are our top 10 countries with the highest gross minimum wage in the world. Before you start, if you're new to the channel, subscribe and activate that notification bell so you don't miss any of our new videos. Okay, let's go! Number 1 is Luxembourg at $2,141.99 euros. Luxembourg offers the highest minimum wage of the European Union, but also worldwide. Luxembourg is the second country with the highest GDP per capita. This amounts to 102,200 euros in 2019. The country's economy is flourishing. It depends largely on the banking and financial sectors, but also on the chemical and mechanical industries. Luxembourg is very attractive within Europe, especially because of its job market, which attracts thousands of newcomers every year. The unemployment rate is very low, and despite a slight increase due to the crisis, salary inequalities remain below the European average. The cost of living in Luxembourg is quite high. Housing prices are among the highest in Europe, especially in the capital. However, this high cost of living is compensated by the level of salaries and is balanced by several services and social benefits. Australia, 1,950 euros. It is well known that Australia is a country where life is expensive. It's therefore not surprising that the minimum wage is one of the highest in the world. The Australian economy is growing rapidly. Nearly 80% of Australia's economic activity comes from the service sector. Australia is a country that is distinguished by its natural resources. 45% of its exports come from the mineral sector. Australia is one of the world's leading exporters of raw materials: coal, gold, uranium, natural gas, as well as meat and grain. Its prosperous economy offers one of the highest standards of living in the world. The cost of living is generally higher in GDP per capita at 48,239 euros per year. However, the level of wages is more or less in line with the prices applied in the housing sector and food expenses in particular. Ireland, 1,706.9 euros. The minimum income in Ireland has grown significantly in recent years to reach 1,706.9 euros a month in 2020. In 2019, the GDP per capita is one of the highest in the world and was 72,260 euros. The main sectors of economic activity in Ireland are agriculture, industry, and service. With a relatively low corporate tax rate, the country attracts several multinationals: Amazon, Apple, Google, IBM, etc. The technology and pharmaceutical industries are also major poles of the Irish economy. Generally speaking, the cost of living in Ireland is high compared to other European countries, notably France. The country also has an unemployment rate of 6.3% in 2020, a figure higher than the European average. The Netherlands, 1,680 euros. The Netherlands is the 6th largest economy in the Eurozone and has a stable and resilient economy. The Dutch economy is based on the industrial, service, and primary sectors of agriculture and fisheries. In 2019, the country's agriculture and horticultural exports were worth 94.5 billion euros. The Netherlands is also home to many multinational companies, such as Heineken, Philips, and Royal Dutch Shell. The GDP per capita is higher than the EU average, reaching 59,554 euros per year in 2019. The Netherlands is known for its quality of life and places great emphasis on individual freedom and work-life balance. Other highlights of life in the Netherlands are the social benefits, especially in terms of sick leave and care services and security. On the other hand, the unemployment rate will rise to 3.8% in 2020, although it remains relatively low. The cost of living is relatively high, especially in terms of housing, which is expensive and difficult to obtain, especially in the major cities. Belgium, €1,625.72. In Belgium, minimum wages are set by collective bargaining agreements. The amount depends on the sector, but also the age, the function, and the seniority of the employer. On the other hand, there is a guaranteed average minimum monthly income, which is set by the National Labour Council and which all employees over 21 are entitled to receive, regardless of their sector. This income amounted in 2019 to €1,625 a month. In Belgium, the economy is oriented towards the service sector, which accounts for 69.5% of GDP, and the industrial sector, which accounts for 19.1% of the country's GDP. In 2019, the GDP per capita was €41,460. For a French expat, the cost of living in Belgium is relatively the same. The most expensive cities are Antwerp, Brussels, and Leuven. The country offers a good healthcare system. Food and housing costs are comparable to those in France, with a slight advantage for Belgium. Germany, €1,584. Germany is the first economic power in Europe and the fourth world power. Its economy is characterized by the industrial sector, which represents approximately 26.8% of the country's GDP. The most important and successful sectors are automobile manufacturing, the electrical industry, and chemicals. German foreign trade is also a main driver of its economy. The job market is dynamic in Germany, and there are many job and recruitment opportunities. The total unemployment rate in 2019 was one of the lowest in the world at 3.1%. The GDP per capita in Germany is €41,510. Wages in Germany are often considered to be higher than in France, but charges and taxes are higher. Also, Germans would have a higher purchasing power than their neighbors because the cost of living in terms of housing, food, transportation, and leisure is, in general, lower than in the other European countries. The United Kingdom at €1,583. The United Kingdom is just ahead of Germany in terms of minimum wage. In fact, it had the biggest increase in 2020 since its creation in 2016. In fact, the minimum wage increased by 6.2% for employees over 25. This is one of the first decisions of Boris Johnson after his victory in the British Parliament in December of 2019. The British SMIC hourly wage, which now reaches €10.26, exceeds that of France, which is 10.15. In addition, British economic growth has slowed considerably since the 2016 referendum on leaving the EU. Its economy is mainly driven by the service sector. The GDP per capita in the United Kingdom corresponds to €37,750. Wages are slightly higher than in France, but the cost of living is also higher. France, €1,539.42. In France, the SMIC is the hourly wage, the legal minimum that an employee must receive. This wage applies to all professions and activities and concerns all employees over the age of 18. Adjusted annually in France, the SMIC in 2020 was €1,539.42, based on the legal 35-hour working week. GDP per capita in 2019 was €35,960, slightly lower than the UK. The French economy is based mainly on the tertiary sector and the secondary sector of industry. The unemployment rate is higher than in the European average, reaching 8.1% of the working population in 2019. The general standard of living in the country is high and distorted mainly by the very high cost of living in the capital of Paris. Compared to its European neighbors, France is below Switzerland and the Scandinavian countries in terms of cost of living. It is, however, above Spain and Portugal. The United States of America. In some countries, the minimum wage is not set at the national level, but at the regional level, as is in the case of Switzerland and the United States. For example, the federal minimum wage in the United States is $7.25 per hour. However, each state is free to set its own hourly rate. This means that pay differentials can vary considerably from one state to another. Wyoming and Georgia, for example, have the lowest hourly rate in the United States at $5.15. In order to combat precariousness, the new American President Joe Biden wants to double the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour. It's difficult to estimate the cost of living in the United States because of the different disparities in each state. Food costs are cheaper than in France if you eat American style. Healthcare in the United States is among the highest in the world. Without health insurance, costs can be exorbitant. The case of Switzerland. Switzerland does not have a national minimum wage, but a cantonal minimum wage. Cantons such as Jura and Neuchâtel have a minimum wage while others do not. The minimum wage is also set by collective bargaining agreements of some companies. In Switzerland, only about 1/3 of employees have a collective bargaining agreement. In September of 2020, the Canton of Geneva voted to implement a fixed minimum wage that amounts to approximately 4,000 Swiss francs gross, or the equivalent of 3,780 euros. This figure may seem very high compared to the French SMIC, but it must be put into perspective. First, because this figure refers to a maximum working time of 45 to 50 hours per week as defined by Swiss law, in practice, the Swiss work an average of 42 hours per week. Furthermore, life is much more expensive in Switzerland than in France. The minimum wage in Geneva is therefore relative to the cost of living. Food and housing expenses are more expensive in Switzerland, not to mention the cost of healthcare and health insurance, which is different from France and more expensive. And that's it! We've come to the end of our video. I hope you liked it. Don't hesitate to share it and to like it, and we'll see you soon.